Hello guys, it is me again, it's HorrorFan34, and welcome back to another video. And figured this would be a random movie review because it is Thanksgiving, so happy Thanksgiving to all of you guys out there. Hope you guys had a great day, ate a lot of turkey and things like that. So I figured, since it's today's Thanksgiving, I figured I'd talk about probably the best Thanksgiving movie that's ever been made. It's my favorite film to watch on Thanksgiving. I mean, whenever I think of like Thanksgiving movies, this is always the one I always think of, and it's the one I watch all the time, and things like that. And it's one of my favorite comedies of all time. It's one of my favorite films, period, of all time. It's one of my favorite films from the 80s, and things like that. And it's my favorite film with both of these guys in it. And that review is going to be on. And I figured this is like a response to Rob, Movie Review Time, because he did a Thanksgiving pick for like a movie review, and he did Grumpy Old Men. So I figured I'd do a response to that and review my Thanksgiving pick. Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. This was a film that was released in 1987, written and directed by John Hughes, who's greatly missed. I really do miss John Hughes. And on top of that too, of course the film stars, I can't get it in the slipcover, but stars Steve Martin and John Candy. Another guy who's no longer with us anymore either. I miss John Candy. Really do miss John Candy. He was such a great, talented, comedic actor. Seemed like a really nice guy in real life as well. I mean, whenever you heard about John Candy, everybody said he was like the nicest guy ever. And that was the thing too with me. Like whenever I meet someone who was associated or worked with John Candy, I always asked him, like, that's like the first thing I asked him was like what it was like working with John Candy. I asked PJ Souls about that because she worked with him on Stripes. Shawnee Smith, of course, I asked her about that when she worked with him on Who's Harry Crumb. And I also asked George Weiner, who was Colonel Sanders in Spaceballs, because John Candy was Barf in Spaceballs. They pretty much said all the same thing. I remember Shawnee Smith, I mean, she didn't even need to say words. She was talking about it and all that stuff. But the first thing that she did before she even talked about John Candy was like her smile just went from ear to ear. Like she had like a really big smile when she heard his name. I mean, that's how much of an impact that John Candy had. George Weiner told me that he was just the guy that you just wanted to give a big hug to. PJ Souls was gushing over John Candy, and so it's really cool to hear about John Candy and how much of a great guy he was and things like that. It makes me sad that he's no longer alive, but this was really the film that was different for John Hughes at this point, because John Hughes before worked with a lot of like teenage actors like Anthony Michael Hall or Molly Ringwald or Judd Nelson, Matthew Broderick, and things like that. So this was really his first film dealing with like adults, not teenagers. And it's a really fun film. The basic idea, you have Neil Page, played by Steve Martin, who's an advertising executive, and he's trying to get home to Chicago for the Thanksgiving holiday, but there's all these problems and things like that, and then eventually he meets up with Del Griffith, who's John Candy, and the two of them are trying to get back to Chicago, and all these problems happen. They run out of money and things like that. They gotta like stay in motels and things like that, and all the hijinks that happen. And on top of that too, not only is this film really good like with comedy and all that stuff, there's also some really good heartwarming drama moments as well. And especially some of John Candy's acting is fantastic. It just shows you that John Candy can do comedy and drama really, really well. There's even a point where Steve Martin tells off John Candy, and John Candy's like, "That's what you think about me? That's fine. I like me. My customers like me. My wife likes me," and things like that. And I thought that was just a really nice piece of acting by John Candy. And on top of that too, there's even a point in the film when there's like so many funny bits in the film I can talk about. One of the best bits is basically John Candy is he's like the shower curtain ring salesman. He pretends like they're earrings that from celebrities, and they make money off that and things like that. So there's even a point in the film when John Candy and Steve Martin stay in this motel, and then these two guys come in and rob them. And actually one of the guys that actually robs them is Gary Riley, who was Chainsaw's buddy in summer school. He was also in Fear. He was one of Mark Wahlberg's like henchmen in Fear. He's one of the guys that robs Steve Martin and John Candy at the motel. That's pretty funny. And Steve Martin finds underwear in the sink, and he's wiping his face with the tidy whities and things like that. The whole point, those aren't pillows and things like that. And on top of that, too, another funny bit is when John Candy is, and Steve Martin, John Candy's driving, they're going the wrong way, and they drive right between the two semi-trucks, and just Steve Martin's reaction before they go in between the semis, he's trying to, like, say, truck, and he can't get it out because he's so scared. And then they go right between the semis, and you get the glimpse of them turning into skeletons. And for a brief moment, Steve Martin's visioning John Candy as the devil and things like that. And the car catches on fire, and Steve Martin realizes that all of his credit cards are burned up and all that stuff. And because like John Candy took it without permission, he's like, "What? Kindness, kindness, kindness! You stole it." And that's where you get the point where they go to this other motel to stay for the night. And John Candy, basically Steve Martin doesn't have enough money to get into the motel, so he says, like, he gives him money and a watch. He's like, "Have mercy. I've been wearing the same underwear since Tuesday." So he's able to get in with a room with a watch and some money, and John Candy's not able to because he doesn't have enough, and he has to sleep out in the burned up car in the cold. And yeah, but this is another part too that I like about the character of John Candy. Like he doesn't think like he's all about himself and things like that. Like he doesn't think like he's Mr. Perfect. Like he does blame himself. He knows that he can be a pain in the butt. There's a point where he's talking to his wife, and he says, "Well, Marie, you were right as day, and finally there's someone's company who I really enjoy, and what do? I smother the poor soul." And he's like, "God, I got a big mouth." He's like, "When am I going to wake up? When am I going to do that?" So, it makes the character likable, and, it makes you feel sorry for John Candy. And Steve Martin invites John Candy in. They have these little bottles of alcohol they're drinking, and they're laughing and telling stories, and it's a good moment between the two of them. And eventually and especially at the ticket counter lady, Edie McClurg, when Steve Martin goes there and that whole rant, you know what I'm talking about. It's really the only reason why this film is rated R, because of that one scene. But getting to flash forwarding to the ending, basically John Candy and Steve Martin get to Chicago, and they say their goodbyes to each other and things like that. And then Steve Martin's envisioning what Thanksgiving's going to be like with his family, and then he starts piecing together things that John Candy said to him throughout their journey, about how John Candy says he hasn't been home in years and things like that. And Steve Martin kind of pieces everything together and goes back to John Candy, and he sees John Candy just sitting in the train station by himself, and he's like, "What are you doing here? I thought you were going home." And then that's when John Candy says, "Well, I don't have a home, and my wife's been dead for 8 years." And really heartwarming scene, really sad scene to know that John Candy's wife is dead and he's been homeless for years, but yet still he's able to have a smile on his face and still keep going and things like that. And Steve Martin feels sorry for John Candy, and then they have that great ending where Steve Martin invites John Candy back to his house for Thanksgiving, and he's introducing everybody. He's introducing John Candy to the family and things like that. And then you have that great final shot when Steve Martin and his wife hug each other, because now Steve Martin's home for the holidays. And you have that last shot where John Candy's you can tell he's thinking about his wife, because Steve Martin's with his wife, but John Candy sees the happiness that's there, and he smiles, and then it freeze frames on him smiling, and then it fades to black, and then the credits roll. So yeah, that last shot when he smiles, it makes me really miss John Candy. So yeah, but this film is a classic. I mean, what more can you say about this film that hasn't been said before? It's a really well done comedy. You have great supporting actors in here. You have Michael McKean, who was in Laverne and Shirley. He was in Airheads. He plays a state trooper in a small role. You have Edie McClurk, who was Grace in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and she was in the Hogan Family. She's the ticket counter lady. Kevin Bacon actually has a small role in this at the very beginning as a guy who steals his taxi from Steve Martin. And also you have this actor, I think Lyman Ward, I think you say the guy's name, who was Ferris's dad. In Ferris Bueller, he's one of the guys that Steve Martin works with. I'm trying to think, you also have Dylan Baker in his first film role. Dylan Baker, if you don't know who Dylan Baker is, he went on to be in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies as Dr. Connors. And he's in this as Owen. The really great scene also with John Candy and Steve Martin when they encounter Owen and things like that. I'm not going to get into that, but I mean, such a great movie. I mean, what more can I say about the film? So that is pretty much it for my review for Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Thanks a lot for watching, and I will see you guys next time. And you guys take care.